Hey guys, had a great response from my how to aim in CSGO YouTube video. So I felt like given how many responses I got and the questions that I would actually, jump on a DM server this morning to miss everything apparently, but also to make a video to respond to some of those questions so that you can all see that. And maybe it's one video or maybe it's two, depending on how long I take, and I'll probably take a long time. So it'll probably be about 1,000 videos, but without further ado, we'll get into it. We'll start with questions from YouTube. And first of all, we have Jacob T14, who asks, any tips on the kind of structure a practice regiment should have? Well, thanks for the question, Jacob. In terms of tips for it, I think that the one thing that I'll re-emphasize that was in the video a couple days ago is you need to make sure that you have specific time dedicated to technique work that is not kind of mixed in with a bunch of other stuff. You got to focus on that specifically. In my opinion, this is one of the better ways to train. There's definitely a bunch of different ways to train. There's ways that are more efficient, less efficient. There are ways that work better for some people than others. And sometimes it might be more intuitive and less intuitive. But what I find is generally a good approach so that you yourself have a very good understanding of what you're doing with your time. It is to make sure that you have some technique work mapped out at the in your routine. It could what I used to go with was usually something between a 20 to 30 minute routine where I would start out with maybe 10 to 15 minutes of technique work followed by 10 to 15 minutes of warm up. And so the technique work, it could be in CS anything from your first bullet accuracy, your counter strafing, your quick scoping with an AWP, it could be spray patterns, it could be the tracking as we talked about. And when we're talking about doing this technique work, what's really good to understand sort of where you're at, because we're not really concerned at this point with killing people. We're concerned with isolating the technique itself. So what you're wanting to do there is, you want to go onto aimbots. You want to be playing against bots or be on a server on your own or be on a recoil trainer, something like that, to really just kind of isolate that specific concept. Because again, you're not really wanting to add in when you're kind of developing those techniques, the extra elements of the geometry of the map, how you take certain angles, how you might be dodging, how this guy wide swings and the other guy does a shallower swing. We don't really care about those things right now. In the technique work, what we care specifically about is isolating the technique elements and then just going from there. So make sure you have that technique work in there. Yesterday, a couple of days ago when I made the video, I showed, how you can do some stuff like that in aimbots, but there's obviously lots of different tools to do that. So that's what I would say would be a baseline, and have a routine every single time you play, no matter what, get that 30 minutes in there. Like, you decide what the time is that's good for you, but get that 30 minutes in there. Another good and important tip as well, I just have to throw in there, is good sleep. We know that sleep is, from various studies, that sleep is extremely important, specifically as well in terms of cementing and improving motor memory and motor coordination. So we're talking about, teaching ourselves new and different ways to use the mouse for better mouse control, or better, technique on whatever it is, you may be trying to train. What's really important is the sleep, because when you're sleeping, your brain goes through a rehearsal phase where it repeats everything you did during the day, in that sense, many times on fast forward. And so that's a really important factor in terms of improving. It also means that you may not see improvements day to day and sometimes even week to week, but you just have to trust the process. And one day, I think most people have experienced it, you wake up and everything just feels a bit better. Also, another thing, as a quick tip as well in terms of DMing, because a lot of people don't necessarily know when to stop or how much is enough. Generally speaking, again, we want to use DM. I would say the warm up, as if we're using DM for warm up, if we want to have our warm up be the thing that makes us feel kind of emotionally good about the game, gets us moving our mouse around a lot, gets us feeling it out. And there's some more questions about this more specifically later on, I think. And so we want to make sure that the DM is time we're spent feeling good. And one tip for that is playing music whilst you're DMing. You just want to feel good. It's not about the frags. It's about practicing, just going through the motions, getting yourself used to all the things you're going to be doing in the game. So pre-aiming and angle snapping and tracking and good crosshair placement and flicks and and maybe specific weapons, or you want to practice 2-bullet sprays, 3-bullet. You just go through a few different things, and you don't care about one of the reasons that music is important is for two things. One, to help you, because music gives you it's like a positive feedback already, because you enjoy the music, you're going to bop your head to it, you feel like you're in a flow, like kind of, it doesn't really matter as much that if you're missing shots. It's more about just having integrity behind the practice that you're doing. And in the DM, again, like practicing the things that you care about, and you can just decide, and the kills don't matter. It's DM, nothing really matters except you just doing reinforcing the right habits. So there's hopefully that will help to answer your question. In terms of structure, again, you gotta kind of figure it out. But there's I think I gave you a couple ways that I would do it. It doesn't have to be complicated. Okay, so the next question is from Pharaoh something. Nice video, really made me insightful of what I've been doing wrong the last few months. But I have a question. Would you say it'd be a good habit to always go in aimbots and fast reflex training before DM? Is it just me having a bad habit to use DM as a way of training? And so I can kind of more quickly answer this one, just because we went over some of those points in the previous question. Effectively, DM can be, great training. It's just that you're mixing up a lot of different things. And let's say, movement is something that's weaker for you. You might want to spend that 15 minutes of technique time, if it's 15 minutes, doing, KZ or something, or KZ. Or you may think, well, actually, KZ to have, enough training in that for me to feel like I'm, actually doing something. I want to put more time towards that, or put more time towards that, but do it in a different way. Add that to the end of the day, perhaps, because that it's a more low energy, there's less focus and slightly less precision that's required compared to precision aiming and technique work and so on. So you could actually maybe fit that in at the end of the day if that's part of the technique work that you want to throw in there. But otherwise, indeed, DM is great for overall warm up, but you're going to be missing that component of again, it's kind of like when I was showing you guys yesterday about with the still targets, just kind of seeing how quickly can you get your crosshair to those targets, and then you start speeding it up to get the accuracy, plus building speed behind the accuracy. It's a similar thing whereby if you're playing DM, you can't control the environment as much, so you can't specifically isolate some of those things that you want to work on. And I think that could be, again, it might not be the best training method for everybody, but I would definitely advocate that it's a solid way to train, and that you can find benefits from it no matter who you are. So it's something where give that a go, and just make sure that you're honest with yourself in what your weaknesses are, and then think about what are the best ways I could try to practice those things. Like what actually is what entails doing that thing. Okay, let me go to aimbots, or let me go to some other random custom map that you found. Maybe it's YPrac or whatever it is, and go forth and train. Let's see, where's the next question? I've got to tab out to the other PC. Let's see. What to do if you get cold hands during the game? I always use a heat bottle, but the effect feels too short, and often I get cold hands. And this is from Art YCH. I'm not sure how to say your name, but thanks for the question. Cold hands is obviously the bane of all of our existences, collective existences as players. And actually currently I have cold hands, and I'm kind of feeling it. And so there's definitely a couple ways you can kind of deal with it. And I'm also going to quickly just go into a quick side point. You're not always, by the way, going to feel perfect. Stuff is not always going to feel perfect, but the importance of having routines is that you can say, okay, I've done my 30-minute routine. Today, I don't feel as good as I did with it yesterday, but that's okay. I've done my technique work, so I know that, I'm putting the focused time that I need to into the things that I, am the most weak on, that I have decided that I want to improve for whatever reason that might be, whatever goals that you may have as a player. Maybe you're an AWPer and you're working on some of the AWP technique work. And so just having that 30 minutes, it doesn't matter necessarily how you feel afterwards. Just having done it and having that routine and knowing that you're working on something, you're doing what you should be doing to improve that thing. Again, I need to make it really clear. You're not going to always see the improvements immediately, and you're not always going to feel great from doing your warm-ups and from doing your technique work. Sometimes it's going to suck a little bit. This is why, for example, Elish was talking about the A game, the B game, and the C game. And these are concepts taken from his sports psychologist, Jared Tendler, who I also did a podcast with recently. Definitely check it out if you didn't see it. sometimes you just won't be as good as other days. And the problem is when we want to have this kind of illusion of control that, hey, you know, I should be as good. I should always be as good as the best day that I ever had. Then you're going to set yourself up for failure, and you're going to create more pressure on yourself, which is going to also in turn make you more focused on your performance. And the problem with being too focused on your performance is that you shouldn't be focused on your performance. You should be focused on making decisions and executing. You shouldn't be focused on how am I performing today? Oh, I'm performing well or I'm performing bad. That is completely irrelevant to what you're trying to do, which is to win the game or to practice various skills and to try to enforce good habits and you know, with good consistency. You know, being consciously focused on your performance will have a negative impact on your performance. So we want to make sure that we are practicing mindsets that don't put us in this position where we're thinking consciously about, oh shit, I feel really bad about my performance right now. And I know that, for example, and I'll address this, that there are situations in the game where you're playing and your teammates are going to give you shit for a play because they're assholes or whatever it is, and you're going to feel self-conscious. And that's going to make you play worse. Like, we've all experienced that, right? That's a problem that can quickly compound, because then you feel more pressure on every single play that you make, because you feel like you have to make up for what you just did. And that's not going to be, again, conducive of you playing well. So we want to make sure that we avoid, you know, from a psychological perspective, a mental game perspective, we need to make sure we avoid these kinds of mindsets. So again, you know, understanding that inherently our performance and is not always going to be consistent, especially our aiming and mechanics and so on. That's never going to be reliable. You can get the reliable. You can increase your averages over time. That's what getting better is. But ultimately, that's what it is, though. Is you're increasing your averages. You're not creating this one. You're not replicating this one best performance you always feel like you're capable of doing just because it happened one time, right? Okay, so kind of went away from the question slightly there, but I'll get back into the cold hands thing. Cold hands kind of sucks. Again, though, it does go into what I mentioned, whereby you can't always fix stuff. So you have to understand how to be okay with stuff and to just like let it happen and just kind of work with it and not focus on it, right? And that's kind of why I went off into those points. So with cold hands, there are various things you can do. You know, you can try to raise your overall body temperature. Like, these are the most effective things that I have found that actually can work consistently for this. You try to raise your overall body temperature by putting on a jacket or something. And if you're like me, you won't want to play with sleeves, so you have to find a good option for that. I actually have one of my favorite options is actually like like this really like nice thick hoodie that is it has cut off sleeves. So that way, you know, I don't have those sleeves when I'm playing, but I have the warmth of a hoodie, and increases the overall body heat. And the thing is that your hands could have poor blood flow, or you could have poor blood flow. So not specifically your hands, but there could be poor blood flow. And there's, you know, if it is because of an underlying condition, obviously, you know, not much. I have no idea how, you know, what you would do with that. But what you can do is, which is universally effective to improve your circulation and blood flow, is exercise. So, you know, one thing that, again, I used to do is I used to always train at the gym before playing, and that was one of the reasons, was because after doing that, I felt more mentally alert because of the exercise. And I also felt that my body felt like better because my body was like warm, there's blood flowing through my body. And if we think about the idea of cold hands, think what's happening when your hands are cold. Like, let's think what happens when your hands are freezing cold. They're numb. When they're freezing cold and numb, you lose, you know, the deftness. You lose dexterity. Tangibly, you lose dexterity. You can't move your hands as well. The coordination is off because of the cold. Now, when your hands are cold, obviously this is actually happening, but just to a more minute scale, which is why it makes the mouse feel weird, and why we don't want to have cold hands. We don't want to have this perfect temperature where we're kind of not even feeling like the mouse is an extension of our arm, as opposed to us feeling the disparity in temperatures, because that awareness also is, you know, harmful for your performance, as we just mentioned. So, you know, one thing about this as well, which is a problem, is sometimes it can just happen because of stress or anxiety. And if you're in a particularly stressful situation, like it's a really important match, you know, you're just going to have to get used to playing with cold, sweaty hands sometimes. And it just can't always be perfect. You know, again, exercise and, you know, increasing your overall body heat, those are the two things that that I would suggest as, you know, things that can work. But you also have to learn how to play with it. And it in of itself, you know, the mark of a professional is to perform when everything's going wrong. And similarly, you can't always have the playing environment as you want to have it. So you have to focus on doing what you can and accepting the challenges as they come. Even if you feel like everyone else is in more favorable conditions than you, a part of having the correct the champion's mindset, or, you know, whatever you want to call it, is this idea of being able to perform even when everything is going wrong and finding solutions when everything's going wrong, because you have a fighter's mentality and you don't have a weak mentality. So there you go. There's an answer to it's a really long answer to a question that's just about cold hand. Right. In 1613, this is from what question mark? In 1613, when you're talking about playing deathmatch only to get the feeling of your mouse, what do you suggest when you feel your mouse movements are somewhat numb that day? I'm talking about that you feel for when you know it isn't going to get better for the next hour. So that's the answer to that question is pretty much just the ideas I just went over. You just have to understand that, you know, when you're in your C game, basically. And again, I would definitely recommend listening to the parts of the Elige podcast where he talks about A game, B game, and C game to help you kind of understand that, you know, even the best player in the world is going through, or well, you know, one of the best players in the world, I should say, is going through, you know, experiences these issues and has to like learn how to manage them and handle them. And also, I would really recommend the Jared Tendler podcast, so you have more of an awareness of the psychological components that go into the game. So that way you'll have more appreciation. Not saying that you don't have appreciation already, but you know, it will give you more appreciation for the mental aspects of the game and how impactful they are. And that a bad mentality is way more damaging than having cold hands. And there's ways you can deal with the cold hands. You know, you can try to account for that. Right. And also, you know, if you're having a worse day in terms of your warm-up, as I mentioned, some days aren't going to feel as good. So sorry, that doesn't, you know, there's no magic pill, unfortunately. So there's another question about stress and colds. And I guess I've said more or less everything I can on that. So this is from Sismon Kowalczyk. I really don't know how to. I think it looks like a Polish name. I really don't know how to pronounce that. I apologize. I've been wondering how to distinguish if my aim weaknesses are coming from me or if it is just my mouse or mousepad limitations. I feel like I can't track at long ranges because my mouse starts to jump on the mousepad instead of smoothly gliding. Also, I think that my hand isn't perfectly suitable for my mouse when I play. It doesn't bother me that much. I've got 4,500 hours, and every time when I look at some clips of mine from 2 years ago, I think I played better with some previous mouse.
Hey guys,
please answer my first question.
Right now in my hand.
Oh, that's
like really.
Right, let's get rid of that. So thanks for the question. This is definitely a really difficult one. You've entered some very difficult territory, and I joke about this with someone I play with on my stream all the time called Mike's, because you know we both experiment with a lot of different mice and pads and various feelings, and so it can be quite difficult to kind of figure out what is the perfect thing, a perfect solution. And the answer is that there isn't a perfect solution, because effectively when it comes to technique, mouse control, until there are mice which are specifically designed for your hand anatomy and your grip preferences, you're not going to have a perfect mouse. We might not be too far away from that, a world where that kind of thing is becomes possible, but ultimately right now it's not. So you have to really assess, try to figure things out yourself, experiment with different mice. And for me, it's quite hard to give advice without knowing the specifics behind, your grip style, your current sensitivities, and seeing a clip. If I could see like a clip of the things you're talking about, I could probably have a much better guess as to how to specifically guide you into, give you some leads to what to experiment with that could be suitable. But it depends so much. Are you a wrist player or are you a palm player? For example, I guess I'll go into aimbots quickly and I can talk about this a little bit. Oh, that's not the right thing. See if I go into aimbots. Right. So if you're a wrist player, you're going to have some limitations. So for example, Simple's a pretty wrist dominant player. His sensitivity is slower than mine, and one of the reasons for that, again, this stuff isn't really that complicated. If you think that I have a hand and I have a mouse and I have a sensitivity, right, my hand can only do so much consistently within a certain range. Once I start to push the range that my hand is physically capable of doing, I start to struggle. So for example, with my sensitivity, I have pretty fast sensitivity, but I have really small hands as well. And I have a very light and small mouse, which has been suitable for me. I can kind of comfortably operate within this range and make any kind of adjustments I need to in this range. Once I start going to this range, from this as my central anchor point, let's say, this is when my wrist is starting to kind of get to its end range. And once it's getting towards the end range, I have a lot less kind of maneuverability and give. So that means that range, if I have to like go to there, that's very uncomfortable. Another reason, by the way, why crosshair placement and pre-aiming is really important, because I reset my mouse pretty quickly to make sure that my anchor point, my center point, is always suitable for the engagements I'm going to have. But also understanding how to do mouse resets and if you're someone that wants to lift your mouse, or you don't use a mouse lifting technique, depending on what's suitable for you, you have those techniques available to you to kind of counteract some of these things. So if you're running into these problems and you feel like, I've got all these different techniques, but I'm still finding that I'm having these issues, what you can start to think about is experimenting with different mouse sizes or shapes. Now you can one question I think you should ask yourself is your shape suitable for your grip? And be really honest with that. And then think to yourself, well, if the shape is really suitable to my grip, but I'm having trouble consistently managing it on my surface, then it could be the case that you have too much friction on your mouse pad, or or the mouse feet. Maybe you need some new Teflon feet, or maybe you need to get a mouse pad with less friction, or maybe it's the case that what's happened is that if you have a cloth pad, you've worn it to a degree where you've increased the friction because of the amount of wear and tear the mouse pad has gone through. This is the inherent issue with cloth pads, is that they do wear over time, so they change friction over time. And for some people, they really enjoy this, and for others, they don't. I definitely don't enjoy that, which is why I used the glass pad for many years. Because of the glass pad, although they don't really make them anymore, you actually have a consistent surface that's hard. And what wears out is not the glass. Glass never changes. You just wipe it every time. Like I would just get a bit of just a damp cloth and wipe it every time. It would be completely the same every single session. The only thing that would change is the Teflon feet on the mouse. But that was super easy to replace. I just have like a sheet of Teflon, and every 2-3 weeks when it starts to feel a little bit weird, I just replace the Teflon feet, and it would always feel perfect. So it could be a friction thing for you. It could also be, if you're finding trouble with the consistency and skipping with the mouse, it could also be that when you're doing smaller movements, if you go to higher sensitivity. I'm not sure if this affects you with lower sensitivity, but it could be that you're gripping your mouse too hard as well. This is also something that affects a lot of people. And this is one of those things where you need to be aware of this. So when you're gripping your mouse too hard, understand that, you want to be in kind of a situation which is always very relaxed. Actually, Rambo has some cool videos on this. If you check out Rambo's YouTube channel, he's got some cool videos when it comes to mouse mechanics and stuff like that. But and one of the things, he has a great video which describes the idea of always knowing what your grip is on your mouse, always having it the same. And I think this is actually something that people take for granted. You just kind of slap your hand on the mouse and you don't necessarily think about it too much. But that is really important. And also, if you're somebody, and I have this problem as a wrist player, that where your grip changes based on the situation, because let's say I'm getting to, if I play a lot of these aim trainers, they demand certain movements of me that in Counter-Strike, I don't need those movements as much. So but to do those movements, I have to change my grip. So this causes some problems. And so I have to understand that my grip needs to always stay the same. Because I'm training specifically for CS, and so my grip needs to stay the same. And that's a really important idea. So yeah, that's a lot to work with there. I'm sorry I can't give you a specific answer without more specifics, but you really have to start troubleshooting it. Experiment with some different mice. If you can't afford any, see if you can go to a friend's house and play around with it. Bring your mouse pad. If you maybe go into a store and try out some mice, see how they feel, see how the weight is and stuff like that. Try to be creative with it. Right. Next question. Would you say it's worth trying to relearn your way of aiming after thousands of hours? I never paid too much attention to wrist arm movement. I just played the way that felt natural. So this, yes, I think you absolutely should try to relearn the way that you aim. Over the many years of playing for me, I've changed the way that I aim a huge amount of times. The thing is that there's only like usually a short period of getting used to stuff. I think learning mouse excel was perhaps one of the most difficult things, because mouse excel is a very specific way of using a mouse that you kind of have to learn. And I think it took me maybe 2-3 months at first to get used to that. But otherwise, learning different mouse techniques is really important, because what it does is it allows you, if you're that person that you're already wanting to experiment because you don't quite think that you have a great answer for your current situation with aim, or you don't feel like you're getting out of it what you want to get out of it, then experimenting and learning different techniques for the mouse is really beneficial. For example, like one thing that I started doing it last year was I started experimenting more with a technique that I started using in Quake Champions, where whenever I was because typically I'm a wrist player where the bottom of my wrist pivots my wrist, and this is like what I've gone back to recently this year when I started playing. After a lot of experimenting, I found that I went back to this. I found that it was better for me, even though there are some issues with it, but that's maybe for another video. But yeah, so I pivot from this point here, which is resting on the mouse pad. But when I would be tracking, what I would do is I would change my grip. So instead of having my wrist pivots be the pivot, my wrist comes off, and then my arm makes contact with the mouse pad here instead of here on the wrist. And I found that then isolated away my wrist, and it became, I isolated my arm as for tracking. And I found that this gave me tracking over bigger distances. And you saw, in fact, I'm going to go back to aimbots. You saw how I was talking about having natural limitations in terms of the range for your wrist. Well, this was my answer to this, because in Quake, you have these situations where you could be caught in a fight and you're tracking, and I'm tracking here. Let's say this is the center point. I'm tracking here. It's the center. This is the edge of my range. What do I do if the guy goes further over here? It starts getting shaky. I can't quite control it over here. So what I decided was the solution was to lift my, to do that technique as I suggested. And then now I can kind of, track. The precision isn't as good for me, but I can consistently track, over here, over here. It doesn't really matter where they are. But if I'm, again, like now I'm back on with my wrist as the focus point here, I can't do that like that. So basically I created that technique as a response to a need. The game was telling me, you need to be able to do this. Can you find a way to do that thing? And if the answer is no, then I have to change something. But I found the solution, which was to add a technique in, and that took a while to kind of switch between to switch between techniques, mid-fight and stuff. It took me a while to get used to that, but when I did, I found great benefits for it. I also experimented with mouse excel, as I mentioned, and after 2 years of using it, after I was using it for that period of time, I was like, I'm going to go back to playing without it now, and I'm going to learn some different techniques. I'm going to try a slow sensitivity where I'm using more of my arm, and I use that for quite some time. And I think experimenting is really important, because it teaches you different ways to use the mouse. It teaches you different techniques. And then eventually what that does also is it opens up the amount of mice that you can use, because when you have various types of mice, they'll have, different types of mice will have different types of, contours and grooves and shapes and weights. And so you can be a wrist player, but maybe you're more of a fingertip player with certain mice, maybe more of a claw player. You can kind of start to mix that up as it befits the mouse that you want to use, once you give yourself an arsenal of mousing techniques. This is obviously something that would take more time to kind of use. And obviously, you do want to settle on something at some point for best performance. But I do think that it's beneficial in my own experience, as I would say over the years, this has given me a much more consistent and confident base to work from. And whenever I go, I'm away for it, let's say a month or 2 months. When I come back in, it doesn't take me more than a couple days to get my aim to like 85% of where to 85% of 100%. So yeah, I will go to the next question now. Right. Let me see. Oh, and a quick point actually about that last question. Muscle memory is something you can build pretty quickly with good training. So I wouldn't worry too much about losing the muscle memory. If you have a good reason for wanting to experiment, I would say lead with your curiosity. Leading through your curiosity is generally a good practice I've found in life to lead you to answers. To answers, like, you know, the curiosity is really the call for knowledge, and the more knowledge that you get, the more tools you have to work with, and that's typically beneficial. I'm trying to, this is from Flick Switch. I'm trying to improve specifically my tracking aim in arena FPS games. Are there any aim trainers or CS custom maps that you could recommend for that? Yeah, I think so. I think there are three. Let me see. Oh shit. Okay, let's have a look at my Steam. So there's three that I like a lot. Obviously, you know, Kovac is extremely popular. We've got Aim Lab, we've got Aim Hero. I don't think this has been updated as much. This is something that I used to use all the time for tracking, actually, specifically. I'll install it, actually, but I think they stopped updating it and there were issues with it. It got really buggy and I couldn't use it anymore. I'll actually see if I can actually launch it here. But yeah, I think that a lot of these programs are pretty beneficial because, again, one of the things I was talking about yesterday is that with tracking, you know, your aim should be consistent. Oh, I actually have to make the models move. Your aim should be, you know, it should be consistent based on the speed of the models, and that's what you're kind of trying to work out. Now, the problem with this is that when you do like an aim tracker, what it will do is it will help you to kind of get used to this idea of you know, tracking the models. But the problem actually comes when, for example, like let's say I'm training my tracking, right? And training my tracking is to some extent, it's a call on your motor memory to know, okay, I have to move the mouse at this particular speed. Now, models don't move this quickly in Counter-Strike. I'm in Counter-Strike, and obviously this is an aim train or whatever, but models don't really move this consistently. But it is good training in terms of the raw element. So obviously, you know, you can't substitute actually playing the game and doing the tracking aim and stuff. Like if you're playing Quake, you know, Rocket Arena, for example, is an amazing tool, or Clan Arena is an amazing tool for helping to learn your tracking. And it's something I used a lot when I was playing in my Quake Live days. I would specifically, I remember I would, sometimes I would take, if I would have a break and I would come back and I would change some settings, I would spend almost a week, I think I would come back and I would spend the next 7 days at least 2 to 3 hours a day. I wouldn't touch the actual, you know, Duel or TDM or CTF or anything like that. I would just play Clan Arena, specifically focusing on like learning my, you know, my new settings and practicing the tracking and everything like that. Obviously, like learning to move at different speeds is useful, but you have to also understand how the models move in the game that you're playing. So let's see if this one actually works. Because there was one thing that I really liked for CS in this, but even though it was for CS, I actually what am I trying to say? I was training Quake Champions at the time, even though this is like a CS thing. So let's see if this actually works. Should be a 1 for me. Could I invert that Y? Okay. So let's see if this works. It just used to always crash on me. I think it was. So this is like one of the tracking ones. Can't even speak English anymore. Yeah, this is the one. It was simple, and I put it on like easy shooting range. Yeah, I think this is what I used to do. Oh no, this is not the right one. Let's go back to the main menu. Yeah. I think, yeah, I used to use this one. I don't know why it has music, but I used to use this one because it was a mixture of like, you know, tracking and flicking. My sensitivity is all wrong here, but you know, I used to just try to see how accurately I could do this. But I really like this challenge because even though like with these challenges, what tends to happen is, you know, you get to this point whereby you get good at the challenge and not necessarily better at the aiming. That's also something that you have to consider when you're playing these aim trainers. But again, you know, aim trainers are good in terms of practicing raw aim. I think that aim trainers can go further than that. And I might be doing some work with one of them to kind of build something that might be a good look for people that are playing CS or wanting to get better at arcade FPS and so on. But on to the next question. Right. Okay. Have you ever, this is from Solo, have you ever messed around with Schultz tables to improve or gauge peripheral information gathering? I have not, but I will definitely look into that. Thank you for the tip. That's in my comments on YouTube if anyone wants to scroll down for that. This is from Sheepdog. Sheepdog. Oh man, I'm such a posh person online sometimes. Good informational video. My aim is at a pretty high level nowadays, but of course plenty of improvement can still be made. It seems the main problem is my anxious brain making my arms or eyes or hands or something feel uncomfortable even after an extended warm-ups. Do you have an idea that can specifically target that aspect quite quickly? It's the main ceiling to my aim being consistent, as well as being able to focus more effectively on the aim training too. I think one of these things, I think again, like, it's always difficult to try to diagnose these problems specifically, but it sounds to me as though the focus might be in the wrong place. It sounds like, you probably, as you say, have a high ceiling, already like a very good aim, but it sounds like it's more of a psychological / mental approach that is creating your inconsistencies or maybe compounding your inconsistencies. And again, without seeing you play, it's really hard to know, but this is what I would guess. And I would say that, one of the things that you would want to focus on is, I mean, it could help you to have these good training routines, as we were describing previously in this video, where you have a technique work and a warm-up routine. And I think one of the things that's then important for you is to try to really shift your focus away from thinking about your kind of mechanical or individual performance when you're playing the games. And I want you to go out and for the next week of matches that you play, I want you to focus specifically only on the decisions. I want you to hyper focus on your decisions. I don't want you to focus at all on your individual play. I want you to practice not touching not pressing the scoreboard or anything like that. And just every time you're making a play, whether it's late round, mid rounds, early rounds, whatever it is, I want you to really think about it. And every time the play has been completed, I want you to think about, did I do it? Was that good? Would I have done that again? And I want you to make sure that the answer is not coming from any level of outcome dependency, because that should never be that's never a metric with which we can decide a success criteria. So I think that could maybe help you, because it sounds like your inconsistency there could come from too much of a focus on the aiming elements of playing. Again, I might be wrong. There are lots of people that would benefit from what I just described, but with the limited information I have, I would say that could be a good experiment for you. Again, one thing I need to remind everybody as well is that ultimately, when we're talking about aiming, it should be something that just happens. Whenever you've been in that flow state, it's just happening. It's something that you're experiencing. You're not trying to force it or anything else. And so to be, too focused on trying to do it, you're trying to have flow state. There's no such thing. Flow state is just kind of you dialing into the intuition system by getting into this very comfortable place of focus where you're just kind of going and just experiencing everything in the moment and just making decisions in the moment. And you have an incredible read for what's going on, and you kind of understand everything that's going to happen. You know already the decisions you're going to make ahead of time, and you're kind of already absorbing the information and already processing what's going to be happening in the future, visualizing everything. These are some of the things that are happening when you're in that flow state, and when you're playing really, really well. And you can't get there unless you're feeling really good and feeling really focused. And so we want to try to achieve those two things. How do we feel really good in the game, and how do we feel really focused? Now, you don't get into flow state by obsessing over your aim and obsessing over by hitting shots. You get into flow state by, generally speaking, by doing things that make you feel really dialed into the game. And for most people, because it's the thing that is most under our control, it is. Actually, Alish spoke about this. He said for somebody like Fur, it's being aggressive. And partly, you know, the reason there would be because Foe is going to be the kind of player that feels like he controls more of the situation when he's being aggressive. He feels more dialed in when he's aggressive. Or, you know, for Elise, you're saying when he's communicating a lot, he feels more in the flow state, and or he's closer to that kind of you know, ultra focused state of mind. And that's partially because when he's doing that, what he's doing is he's putting together all of the pieces of the puzzle, everything that's happening on the map. He's communicating it. He's taking control. He's orchestrating it. He's thinking about it. He's priming his mind. He's also telling his mind to, you know, start to soak into more important information that's pertinent to these things that he's already focused on. And it's kind of this like feedback loop that gets him more and more dialed into what's going to happen. He becomes, you know, clairvoyant, prophetic at that point, and that's when you get that insane reaction speed. That's when your muscle memory just takes over, and you just hit shots, you know, without, you know, realizing what even's gonna, like, what's even happening. And like you're just reacting at that point. You're bypassing your conscious state of mind or your system one completely. And right, so before I go off even more, let's see if I have any more questions here. I think I have to do one more. Mouse Excel, mouse settings, what different sensitivities are better in different games? All right, so this will be the last one from Mikey. Can you talk about mouse Excel, mouse settings, and why different sensitivities are better in different games? Thinking about differences between games and how the kids lower or higher sensitivities. Yeah, so I mean, generally speaking, you can kind of make any sensitivity work in any game. It's all down to technique, honestly. I've seen players who are playing, you know, trick. There's a player called Mew who would play CPMA trick and would do trick jumping. That was his thing, and he had like something like something between 60 to 80 centimeters for a 360. This is ridiculously slow. So his arm is moving like this. There's videos of him like this, just like his whole arm just moving, just like it's like a massive workout. Sorry, I just hit the mic. Like a massive workout for his arm. But he can make that work. It's just all technique. It really is just all technique. So to some extent, yes, you know, most people are drawn to slow sensitivity because for them, when you don't have any mouse control or any technique, a slow sensitivity is it's the easiest entry point. And so then most people end up sticking with it. But you can be extremely precise with high sensitivities because, you know, then you start, you know, recruiting the fingers, and you have, you know, it's just a completely different movements with your wrist. But if you practice enough with it, you learn the techniques, you can get good with it. Some things have, you know, advantages for some people. Slow sensitivities, if you're nervous and you're very shaky, a slow sensitivity will kind of average that out for you and it won't be as bad. But if you're very shaky and you have a very fast sensitivity and you're still not good at controlling it, the anxiety is going to absolutely kill your performance. Just dropped my phone. So there's all sorts of considerations. There's all sorts of pros and cons. Ultimately, though, what I would say is that the game is always going to tell you what it needs you to do. It's just like earlier when I said, oh, you know, I can get to this point, but I'm finding there are situations in Quake where I'm like at my end of my limit and I can't track this area anymore, and my end gets really, you know, shaky and so on. So I had to find a solution for that, and I found a solution, and there you go. The game told me what it needed from me, you know. So you just have to be, you know, sensitive to these things, and also look at how pros aim. Like, look at what it looks like when they're aiming in the game. Like, what kind of techniques are they using? How are they maneuvering around? And then you can start to kind of like try to emulate those people as best you can. All right, so that will do it for this one. I hope it was enjoyable for you guys. I'll make another one for the Reddit people because this is just the YouTube comments, and I don't think I even got all of them. Oh, actually, no, it looks like I did, actually. So there you go. All right, thanks, guys. See you in the next one.